Greetings, system failure listeners. Nate here, Brian over there. Brian, how are we this week, man?
I'm doing all right, Nate. How are you?
Well, it's pretty good. We have a snowstorm raging outside, and we're filming in an unusual location, aka my apartment or my rented house here. Just because we got our family stopping by shortly to bid you a fond adieu as you head south to the great state of Rhode Island to make your move next weekend, eh, Brian?
Well, my auto insurance premium doubled because the state of Rhode Island is run by the mob, you see, and they're all involved with the auto body industry. And but yeah, that is what's happening.
And you do not use your employer's insurance because you work for a car insurance company. You work for a different party. You are a customer of a different party. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I've got USAA.
USAA, and they doubled you up, huh?
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to be true for any insurance company. I guess I could shop around, but the last time I shopped around, the rates were competitive. But if you'd seen these auto body estimates from Rhode Island, you would understand why. I think it maybe is like the third most expensive state for auto insurance in the country, but California still takes the cake with their insane labor rates.
All right. Well, I'm sorry about your auto insurance, but I hope you're otherwise excited about the move. That does sound like a slap in the face, doubling up the insurance premiums there.
It was like a boof, like right in the schnoz or something.
As mentioned, the snow is coming down out there, but we are in the section of the year, Brian, the part of the year where it is a little bit problematic to live in Maine, where it's like we've changed the clocks now because we've got this new improved daylight savings time, so it's like lighter, much later. The sun is at a much higher angle, relative to the horizon than it is during the darkest days of winter, and yet we're still getting the snowstorms here. We're at the phase of the spring where the snow all melts in between the storms. It's all soupy and muddy, mud season they call it, right? But then when the weather rolls in, you're still cold enough to get these snowstorms. So we got the snow building up out there. And this is just the time of year where one might prefer to repair to the Italian Riviera and order a nice spritz, with one of the swirly barber pole straws in it, and look out across, say, the Bay of Naples or something like that. Or maybe Florida, is another good one. This time of year, February, March, even April. It gets to be a little hot down in Florida in April, but this is the time of year where at least my old stomping ground, Central Florida, was downright idyllic. And so my thoughts go to these sorts of warmer climes during this truly wretched time of the year, even though I'll have to admit it does look pretty nice outside with the snowflakes flying.
Well, yeah, a very vivid description there. It's going to be tough sledding until May, pretty much. Right?
Yeah. This we'll get another. We always get one in the month of April. In the first week of April, we get that April Fool's snowstorm. You just know it's coming, and this is not it. It's still too early in March. So, yeah, I suspect we got another storm or two in store for us going forward. The other thing that's happening right now is I can smell the delicious Serbian goulash cooking up in this cast iron pot I have. Got the recipe from the Serbs themselves, having gone to visit them over the past month. And so we got our family coming over to, as mentioned, bid you adieu, Brian. We're going to feed them this delicious Serbian goulash, and I can't wait to eat it. It's real simple. You just basically cook down a bunch of onions until they turn into a jelly. And then you drop random meats on top and load it up with salt and pepper and paprika and a couple of bay leaves, and that's really about all there is to the recipe. No browning of the meat, nothing like that. And so the meat's kind of at that rubbery stage right now, but in 2 hours, when our family arrives, all that meat's going to be broken down into a delicious slurry, the taste of which is incomparable in my estimation.
Well, it's bubbling away cheerfully in the background.
Yes, indeed. Brian, the news is even bleaker than the weather as we stand here recording the podcast on a Sunday morning. The latest news off of Truth Social, which is insane to see diplomacy conducted on a second-rate Twitter site. But indeed, that's the banal terminus to which our politics has brought us. The Donald is tweeting that the Iranians have 48 hours from the moment this tweet is written or live to reopen the Straits of Hormuz, or we'll begin attacks on their energy infrastructure, as if we haven't already begun attacks on their energy infrastructure. And the Iranians responded that any attack on their energy infrastructure will be met with catastrophic attacks on, infrastructure in the Gulf states nearby. What's the Game of Thrones thing with Lord Peter Baelish? Chaos is like a ladder. Chaos is a ladder, something like this. You can just see that the Trump administration is now locked, and they can either retreat with their tail between their legs or escalate, and that's those seem to be the only options. Because the good people of Iran, of course, get a say in whether or not when the hostilities come to an end, when they reopen the Straits of Hormuz and reacquaint the world with its oil supply. Hey, Brian?
Yeah. Well, we can't really negotiate a peace deal with Iran because they'll want like reparations,
right?
And then so our only real choice is to escalate, and that will probably also lead to disaster.
Yeah.
So we're in a tight spot, you might say.
That's a great line from "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" where George Clooney's character is always saying that. We're in a tight spot. And we certainly are. It is amazing to see international diplomacy conducted with absolutely no appreciation or understanding of knock-on effects and secondary effects, I guess is another word for knock-on effects. Just a total strategic blunder here from beginning to end. Is looking like the Iranians are in a good place to make some substantial demands if and when the Trump administration decides it has had enough of this ill-fated military misadventure. And I think one of the things floating out there is this idea that the Iranians are going to have a nice slap a tax on all the ships passing through the Straits of Hormuz, if they are left with their power projection capabilities are left intact. And if that's the case, it would make the Iranians overnight into this, one of these serious players at the table of international geopolitics, whereas before their repressive theocratic regime was maybe marginalized from a seat at the table. I don't think that the Donald administration is going to be able to live with the Iranians controlling the Straits of Hormuz in their entirety, and the most obvious reason they can't live with that is because the Gulf states, of course, will no longer be in a position to recycle all of their dollars they get from selling U.S. oil on the world markets with petrodollars. They'll no longer be recycling those petrodollars back into the U.S. economy by going to our treasury bond auctions and buying stocks on our stock market. And that, of course, could lead to a economic spiral that will mean the complete end of the empire. So it really is wild to see the giant United States, make blunder after blunder, unable to go back in time 4 weeks and fix this unfortunate situation. And so now we're kind of going down with the ship. So,
I think it's easy to castigate the Donald for being like an idiot and blame this all on him. But I mean, really, it goes back to the United States going off like the gold standard in like 1971 under Nixon. We really screwed the pooch then and set ourselves up for this very moment some 60 years later. But also like the assassination of, JFK. It's just the Donald is just like the very aggressive and like tight pimple that's about to burst here at the top of this, the top of the stack here. So I guess that's kind of my feeling now is, I mean, if you just look at the course of history, this is just like the logical conclusion of the American empire here. And it's going to come to a precipitous end.
Yeah, I do see the 63 assassination of JFK and the 1971 abandonment over the summer of 71, the abandonment of the gold standard by a certain Richard Milhous Nixon. I mean, these things created the empire run by the shadowy intel services, one that the nominal head of state, the president, is not actually in control of. And when we go off the gold standard in 1971, we're essentially ripping off the rest of the world, and creating a massive advantage for America. But of course, like you say, Brian, that couldn't last forever. And it's interesting to see it unwinding now in 2026 with the guy from The Apprentice at the helm as the ship sinks lower and lower in the water.
And of course, we went off the gold standard to like fund the crazy war in Vietnam, right?
Yeah, man, I'm sure that was surely a big part of the consideration. We had already. People don't know this, but the Charles de Gaulle, the French, they actually sent warships to New York, and French sailors, marched into the New York Fed and withdrew as much of their gold as they were going to be allowed, as they realized that the United States was going to install a system of monopoly money that would benefit our empire at the expense of everyone else's country, and it was a big deal at the time. Yeah. And I think that paying for Vietnam War, like you're saying, big part of the consideration.
Well, the end of the gold standard, right? Yeah, ushers in like the era of the petrodollar, wherein we no longer have our money backed by gold, but it is backed by we just force everyone to buy U.S. dollars, buy oil in U.S. dollars, and all this military action in the Middle East now, and that's how that gets us to sort of this present moment, right?
Yeah, it's wild times to see it unfold. It does. I'm amazed at how the Iranians had like a cogent strategy, and how that's really, well, it really works wonders when you're having to compete against the evil empire or whatever. And their strategy is remarkably effective. I mean, I really thought it was just going to be more bombings of Iran that were similar to the 12-day war last summer. But the closure of the Straits of Hormuz forces the Donald administration into a position where they're going to have to either commit ground troops or admit defeat. And admitting ground troops, boy, that will sure enrage all of the No New Wars Trump-based coalition that got him elected. And if they have to institute a draft to support the war, which is a serious possibility raised by the Defense Department, the Department of War, as it's now been remonikered. Well, that would really be a wild turn in American history, that now the empire is forced to resort back to the draft, which it had abandoned since the Vietnam War era, as a way of shoring up support for that ill-fated military misadventure in formerly French Indochina. And so, man, I mean, these Persians, the Iranians, this is like Darius and Xerxes, and Cyrus the Great. These are like this is a serious civilization that we've up and messed with now, and it's amazing to see that despite their much smaller military footprint, they're able to yet be effective against the empire. And isn't that kind of mirrors the American Revolution in a way, where a much inferior military force is able to somehow come out on top of the premier fighting force in the world at the time, eh?
Yeah, well, you got to respect Iran's like tactical prudence. I mean, they could have, like on the 12-day war, try to, get more involved, but instead they accepted a plea deal, or not a plea deal, but a peace deal.
Yeah.
And then they waited until like we really overextended ourselves and did something stupid to strike. And I mean, I don't know like what the normies out there are thinking about all this. They probably like hate Donald Trump, and justifiably so. I don't know, it's crazy, but this is like most assuredly the death knell of the American empire. Like it's just like unquestionably, and I guess they have to figure out what to do in light of that. But it is most certainly the end, folks. This is how it ends, 100%. Like we really screwed the pooch this time. Like there is absolutely 0%. Like the Donald's like, this war is ending in 48 hours or it's all over. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
It's all over.
It's amazing. Like what's happening is we're getting like a reveal, like someone's pulling the cloth off the statue here. In real time, we've got this historical moment that we are enmeshed in, but it's so hard to have the appropriate context because normally, it's 5, 10, 15 years on when you're looking back and only then can you put historical events into context. But we know we're looking at a historical event of some substantial moment at this moment because but it's like the true consequences we're going to have to reckon over the next decades as they unfold here. But it sure is interesting to be alive and having access to the global media, whether that be social media or the old-fashioned, old-timey newspapers like the Wall Street Journal, which yours truly is fond of reading. It sure is wild to see it unfold in real time. Well, one senses that you're witnessing history, even though it's impossible to tell what the nature of that history is. We have all we can do is guess and speculate, which we've been doing a great job of so far on this podcast, Brian.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's just like some pivotal moments, right? But I really don't know what to make of like the assassination attempts on Donald Trump and like what that all means exactly. It's really hard to say. But I think like it's just increasingly clear in retrospect that the assassination of Charlie Kirk is just a key moment because he was like advocating. He was trying to stop the Donald from going to war, and like basically the moment that he changed his mind about like Zionism, he gets gunned down, and then like it turns out that his wife was kind of a handler and like worked for the CIA, and now like so just as he's changing his mind about Zionism, basically he gets shot, and Erica Kirk takes over the organization and is now reaffirming the Zionist shill movement that it is. So yeah, I don't know. It's really crazy.
To your point, it is hard to see. I mean, we have all these puzzle pieces, and the question is, what picture are they going to make when you put all the puzzle pieces together? And so with respect to the Charlie Kirk thing, the Joe Kent resignation, and the subsequent rounds that this band has been making on the podcasts, Joe Kent was our, was he the anti-terrorism director, some muckety muck in the, he has like the highest clearance you can get with the U.S. government. He was some kind of a muckety muck with, with the Department of Defense or the intelligence agencies or the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And like the noises, he's saying that he got shut down when it came to the Charlie Kirk assassination, and he wasn't able to, that there was, more powerful, strings being pulled behind the throne that made it so he couldn't get a line of sight into what was going on with the Charlie Kirk assassination. So it's just another puzzle piece to put in to add to the jigsaw puzzle, and the image therein is becoming more and more visible. Like it's coming into view with greater and greater resolution, and it looks like there's this whole Iran-Israel nonsense is definitely related to the Charlie Kirk assassination. It's hard to escape that conclusion based on the testimony of Mr. Kent.
And was it Marco Rubio who gave the statement about who was it that said Israel forced her hand?
Yes. This is Marco Rubio. He is both the man. What are his dual roles? Defense secretary, and he's got another one. It's like the top role in the cabinet, the top cabinet position. What's it called? It's worth getting this one right, Brian. Let's have a look at little Marco Rubio and what are his dual positions here. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. That's what I'm looking for. National Security Advisor, like the top cabinet position. He's both of these, and it was his testimony that the Israelis. This is what you're referencing here, Brian. That the Israelis forced our hand by beginning military operations, and we just knew that we knew that we're kind of stuck going into Iran with them, and that so the choice was kind of taken out of our hands. Remarkable testimony from the Secretary of War. I keep wanting to say Defense Secretary. But also the National Security Advisor. Remarkable testimony. That's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I don't know what people. I guess I feel like the people mostly understand what the score is at this point, and there's just some people who declare to be an anti-Semite or something. If you, I don't know, assess the facts in a rational way.
Yeah.
I mean, if it gets to be. If it's somehow this war in Iran ends swimmingly and it turns out to be like Venezuela, and nonetheless, which I guess I will repent for being an anti-Semite, and I'll say we should have trusted Benjamin Netanyahu all along.
If that happens, if it turns out like you're saying, then I will reassess where I get my news from, and maybe not listen to so much Breaking Points with Crystal and Sagar. But I think that Breaking Points and Crystal and Sagar is the only place, maybe Jimmy Dore also, the only place to get reliable news these days. And speaking of these outlets, the venerable Professor Zhang has been making the rounds. He was on Tucker this week, on Breaking Points, on Jimmy Dore. The dude's been on virtually all of these independent podcasts. And he seems to have his finger on the pulse, predicting that the U.S. is about to lose this war in Iran. And so it's very interesting to hear this man's opinion, because he invokes secret societies, like the Jesuits and the Freemasons, in his estimation of how all of this has unfolded, which is, really interesting analysis, something you would never get from CBS News or the Wall Street Journal, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, all my ideas are stolen from Professor Zhang at this point. And the best Professor Zhang interview was actually one I heard last night on Tom Bilyeu's podcast, who maybe I saw before on YouTube, but his is 2 hours long. And Tom Bilyeu really he needles him about the things that are hard to understand from an American standpoint, Well, one thing about China, right? I guess, you got to wonder if China is gonna be aggressive towards Taiwan now that America is weakened on several this war in Ukraine and Iran and whatnot. And Zhang there raises the point that China is really not interested in wars of aggression, right? Mm-hmm. And mostly what China's history is a lot of civil war, and they call themselves the Middle Kingdom, and they're just trying to maintain sovereignty within their own kingdom, which is an interesting viewpoint. And what else does he talk about? I can't remember the word, if it's eschatology,
the end of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he would say that what the evidence suggests is what we were talking about, that we are we're Israel's bitch, basically, and we are brought into this war by Zionist interests, and it's going to lead to our downfall because the Zionist folks have a greater Israel project.
That's it.
And this war is going to be good for the winners of this war, are like Russia, because the price of oil is going to go through the roof, and they have tons of it, and like Israel, because all the other GCC states, are going to be heavily diminished. I don't know. Those are some of his ideas.
Yeah, so the idea of the Greater Israel Project, right? This is eschatological because it is a biblical prophecy that the nation of Israel is supposed to control all the land between the Euphrates River in modern-day Iraq and the Nile in modern-day Egypt, and that's a huge swath of territory. And some of that includes like southern Turkey, southern Anatolia, which is a NATO member state, so I don't quite know how that would work, but whatever's happening here is certainly connected to biblical prophecy, both on the part of the Israelis and on the part of the Christian Baptist sort of, revivalist type of religion, the prosperity gospel type of, folks. There's they take the biblical prophecy seriously also and believe that a major conflict over the Holy Land is merely the conductor tapping his baton on the lectern to rouse the band and get the judgment day where we'll all be sorted into wicked and saved, and to jumpstart that process and bring it about. And so that there are people with major influence who believe in that sort of thing. And so that's why you have this strange this strange collaboration between the U.S. and Israel, why you have South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham headed over to Israel to teach Benjamin Netanyahu how to handle the Donald and encourage him to make the worst mistake possible for the empire and commit his military to Iran for the benefit of Israeli foreign policy.
Well, one thing I don't understand is how, Israel, assuming the downfall of the American Empire, how do they? Because it seems like they are. They use American tax dollars and military weapons and might and whatnot to exact their will, and so in a post-war with Iran world, how are they supposed to do that? Supposing the downfall of the U.S. That's the one question I want to ask Professor Zhang. But he, speaking of the Greater Israel Project and the prophecy and whatnot, and this is what he was talking about on Tom Billy's podcast, is he takes this view of prophecy as it's like a story that's been forgotten, basically. And so, I guess what happened, the rise of Islam has to do with this war between, Rome and the Persians over the Holy Land in 700 AD, and that's when the rise of Islam happens as a result of that. And then there's this caliphate, which is this unification or I guess it's the Muslims are at the top, but I don't know, the Jews and the Christians were people of the book and welcome in that society, and that's kind of what ruled the Holy Land. And I guess that's kind of the reunification or something. That's the prophecy from before, or that's how it happened before, and it's what's going to happen again, I guess. And so that's what we're headed towards by hook or by crook, is at least what these people believe, and that's what Zhang was on about. I'm
going to have to hit up this I didn't hear Tom Bill use treatment of Professor Zhang. Looking forward to it. But yeah, my understanding of history is that you have the Roman Empire blinking out. It's like the Roman Empire is like the Titanic, right? It breaks in half on its way down, and so you get the eastern half of the Roman Empire, the Greek half, is ruling the Mediterranean, but they're much weaker. They're not as powerful as the Roman Empire was in its heyday around 0 AD. And so the breakup of that polity leads to the rapid Arab conquests of all of North Africa, all of the Levant, and Spain in the 6th and 7th centuries. The 7th and 8th centuries, AD. So you get this, the rapid rise of Islam and the quick cleavage of Islam, just like the Roman Empire, into two factions, the Shia and the Sunni, and history, winds on from there. But that is interesting. It's interesting that the politics of the Roman Empire are still making waves in 2026. It seems so long ago, 2,000 years, but in the great sweep of history, Brian, is it really that long? It's 40 or 50 generations, something like that. It's not that long ago that all these crazy wars with the Roman Empire were taking place across the Mediterranean basin. So yeah, it's funny that those billiard balls are still in motion, still clacking off of each other all these millennia later.
Well, it's basically the same story. You know, it's the tremendous geopolitical importance of the Middle East, and I don't know how if it was the same way back then, but and maybe it's more like a religious importance back then. But I don't know. It's like the cradle of like the world, the Middle East there. So the story carries on, and well, one of Zhang's predictions is that there's that Muslim temple. It's like the third most holy site in the Muslim religion, like the one with the golden dome.
The Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is built on the Temple Mount, where once the second Temple of Solomon stood until its destruction in 70 A.D. by Titus.
Yeah. And so you know, I guess this is where they want in the Jewish tradition they want the third temple and what have you, and this is an important part of the prophecy, and so he's predicting the destruction of that mosque so that this third temple can be built. And so, yeah, it turns out that basically our world's more like Harry Potter than we could have fathomed some time ago. We live in a land of like prophecy and miracles and whatnot. We're really gonna go through it here.
Yeah, it's going to be really hard for. I just remember being caught up with the rise of the atheist movement in the 2000s. A lot of people still think that way. A lot of people put their faith in a complex tissue of science and medical authority. And that is going to have to be reconciled with the fact that we're going into an apocalyptic war based on biblical prophecy. That's going to sure be a shocking revelation, I think, to the populace when the news gets that far, which it seems like it's happening as we speak.
Certainly a head scratcher for the secularists, huh?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Well, that seems like a pretty good dirge for current goings on in the Middle East. One thing that is very interesting. This was also brought to my attention by Crystal and Sagar, so I went down a little rabbit hole here. Obviously, you're aware, and the Wall Street Journal is reporting this week that they need to make a $200 billion ask of the Congress in order to fund this ridiculously expensive war in Iran. They're launching just cheap, crappy drones, and we're having to shoot interceptors with complex avionics and navigational and guidance systems in order to intercept these drones and medium-range ballistic missiles and bring them down. And so, we are 2 orders of magnitude. Every one interceptor is 2 orders of magnitude more expensive than the Shahed drone or the intermediate-range ballistic missile we're shooting down. And so we're burning through cash at an eye-watering rate here. And so now the Pentagon's like, we're going to need some money. We're going to need another a fifth of $1 trillion here just to keep going. And that's over and above the $1.5 trillion defense budget that the Donald, forecast for this year that we've signed into law with that big, beautiful bill for 2026. And so the issue here is the Senate. The House is even more stacked against the Republicans here. The issue is in the Senate, you have some measures that need to have a filibuster-proof majority, that is to say 60 senators, versus a simple majority, that is to say 51 senators. And the 51 senators might be able to pull that off, but the 60 is out of the question, especially considering that Congress this is the first time they have been consulted on this war. And if they approve funding for the war, well, then that could be that's a tacit approval, whereas the Congress before didn't have to vote on this awful war. Now they're going to have to go on record as having been in support of it. And that's not to mention the troubling fact that, normal, like an appropriations bill or something would have to have a filibuster-proof majority approve it, but a budget reconciliation bill only needs the simple majority, and so it's very likely that it's going to be the budget reconciliation process through which we're able to actually get this money passed. Now, I just wanted to give a quote here. I'm just pulling it up. Representative Jody Arrington of Texas, chair of the House Budget Committee, opined this week, quote, "Reconciliation is probably going to be the only vehicle that we put anything in because the Democrats aren't going to support the supplemental for the operating needs for our military." So the chair of the House Budget Committee, like Crystal and Sagar, see reconciliation as the only way to pay for this $200 billion ask from the Pentagon. And a reconciliation process means that for every dollar that you requisition here, you're going to have to slash $1 from the rest of the federal budget. So we're talking about real cuts to like Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid or something. Something's going to have to give because the American people are, for the first time, actually going to have to pay for during the reconciliation process. You can't just authorize spending with no new taxes. We can't just authorize, the sale of even more treasury bonds to pay for it. We're actually going to have to, it's actually going to have to be a budget neutral proposal. And so, that means that the American people are going to have to actually feel the sting of paying for this war versus putting it on the national credit card to pay for another day. And that could really be a big moment, I think, because we finally get to express our extreme dissatisfaction with the endless wars that we have been apparently committing ourselves to in sequence since 2001. So I think that could be a fascinating fight here. I don't mean the Democrats. What are they going to do? They've recently turned their guns on AIPAC and started acknowledging the nefarious influence of the Israel lobby. That's about as far as Democrats seem to be going, as far as their marching orders, as far as their marching orders will allow them to go. But this could really be an interesting fight here over the next month or two as this process unwinds. If it goes to reconciliation, man, you could really get, we could really see some of the pain of these endless foreign wars finally coming home to roost. Could be wild.
Yeah, I guess I would have thought that, or I guess I would predict that Democrats end up just voting to fund this war. I mean, it's, well, they're in an interesting spot because, Donald Trump is wildly unpopular, and certainly the Democrats are going to get some kind of majority at the midterms, and then I'm sure they'll want to bring up impeachment on Donald Trump and, get back to lawfaring him.
Yeah, yes.
I'm sure that's what they want to do. And I suppose that if they deign to vote to financially support the war in Iran, that will maybe undermine their credibility in doing that. So I guess that makes sense. But, well, Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie had the War Powers Resolution Act, and that certainly did not pass, right?
Yeah, yes.
So I would expect that the Democrats are spineless shills and will, vote for war every Congress has as long as I've been alive.
Yeah, the pressure's on the Democrats to if they don't vote for it, they can be called unpatriotic in the subsequent attack ads. But more to the point, they're going to have AIPAC pressuring them too behind the scenes. We don't really have two parties in this country. We've got a mono party, and that's why whether you vote for John McCain or Barack Obama, you're going to get strikes in Syria. There's no real way for the American people to weigh in on foreign policy because of the way the system works. So I agree with you, Brian. They are an interesting spot because they're going to have to attach their name to this war and cut Medicare or Medicaid or something, or SNAP benefits or something. They're going to have to cut something if, in fact, this does go to reconciliation. Or the alternative is to court another different political disaster, a horse of a different color, by not supporting the war. Which is unlikely to be popular with their major donors, but would be popular with voters. So once again, the Democratic Party cleaved in half here. It's torn apart by the tension between what the donors want, which is endless wars and tax cuts for the wealthy and bank bailouts, and what the public wants, which is the opposite of all that. So it's really going to be interesting to see how they play their cards in the next couple sessions here.
Yeah, well, certainly, whether you supporting this action in the Middle East and support of Israel is this crazy political fault line that's materialized to the forefront, where it used to be that there just wasn't a lot of question about it, but since October 7th, it's 2024 there.
Was it 23? I think it was October 7th, 23, right? And now
wasn't the Donald in power at the time? Maybe. Well, whatever. Whenever that October 7th was.
But maybe. Hang on. Whenever it was, though.
Are you looking it up?
I'm just going to look it up and find out if I'm off here. I thought October 7th. Yep, it was 2023.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Well, Biden was president. I guess that makes sense, right?
Yeah, because they were supporting an ongoing genocide and it destroyed their base, right? Biden was cutting blank checks to the Israelis, and the Democrats were out in front of your apartment, Brian, chanting, Free Palestine each and every weekend for years there.
Well, anyway, it'll just be this catalyst is going to roll through our whole political structure, and you're either going to be for it or against it. And so you can be for it and claim that everyone else is a Nazi or an anti-Semite, or you can claim that basically this whole Israel regime is it's Nazism reemerged because it's absolutely crazy and genocidal and killing of tons of people and completely insane. And so it's a real political dichotomy, or it's a real It's a real thing, that's for sure.
Yeah, it sure is, man. Well, I guess that's about all I have to say on the war, the ongoing hostilities in Iran this week. Brian, are you ready to pivot to a new topic here?
Sure.
All right, so what the author and I guess journalist Michael Pollan was on the JRE this week. Did you happen to hear Mr. Pollan's interview?
I don't think so.
This is the guy that wrote How to Lose Your Mind. I think that's the name of the book on psychedelics that he did about 5 or 6 years ago. Michael Pollan was such a respected journalist that he was able to tackle the subject of psychedelics and their potential healing properties with a straight, sober sort of approach that was respectable and well received, on the New York Times bestseller list. So now he's got a new book out. It's all about consciousness and the nature of consciousness and what exactly it is and how our old model of consciousness is kind of outdated and how a new model of consciousness is called for and what that model might mean. In short, Michael Pollan is saying he prophesies a Copernican moment, an inversion where the reality we think we're living in changes dramatically. And so I thought that was interesting. Obviously, his idea was that his idea of a Copernican moment was a fundamental change in the model of consciousness itself. Now, Pollan does not go as far as I do on this topic. I think that what we're going to find out is that the universe we inhabit, the matrix we live in, is partially created by the mind, and that so the idea that the observable universe is it admits of manipulation by the will, aka magic, right? This is the idea behind Renaissance magic. That idea it's already on the table because of the double slit experiment and the placebo effect. But it's interesting to hear a journalist of the pedigree of Michael Pollan, coming to a similar conclusion that something's off about our model of consciousness and that it's in desperate need of an update.
Well, what does he say is the case?
He seems to lean towards the panpsychism sort of route where everything's conscious and that, if it's matter, it also has a component of consciousness to it, and that we are built, that the consciousness that arises from us is somehow attributable to the consciousness associated with the building blocks that make us, if that makes sense. So I don't exactly know what, I'd have to read Pollan's book to dig more into the panpsychism angle. But there are characters like Rupert Sheldrake, who used to hang out with T-Mac. He's still around, he didn't die of a brain cancer in 2001, so Rupert Sheldrake, now an older man, is still around, still making this case for panpsychism and morphogenetic fields. So maybe that is what we're looking at here. But it did seem, based on the JRE interview, that Michael Pollan may have sold it short of the wonder and magic of the potential Copernican inversion. It seemed to me that he had sold it a little bit short. And this reminded me of that the Da Vinci Code book, the Da Vinci Code sequel that came out last December, November, whenever that was, where this model of consciousness, where your brain is like a hard drive, is passé, and the new one is the antenna model. This model of the consciousness, where your brain is more like an antenna, and the signal is really non-local. This is the idea behind Dan Brown's Secret of Secrets, non-local consciousness. And that idea comes from the 1954 book, The Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley. You may remember this one, Brian. This is Aldous Huxley, the man who wrote Brave New World. Aldous Huxley, the man who wanted to be doped up on LSD on his deathbed. And as the drug was taking running its course, during the final minutes of his life, he called for like an extra dose to really kickstart his brain like a Harley Davidson on the eve, like the moments before he died. The guy, talk about putting your money where your mouth is. Man, I can't imagine what that experience would be like. The Doors of Perception comes from an old William Blake story, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, from 1793. And the full quote here is, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. For man has closed himself up till he sees all things through narrow chinks of his cavern." And that's good old William Blake, the British polymath. From the late 18th century. So, I don't know. Interesting to hear Michael Pollan on there rattling the chains, talking about our outdated model of consciousness. The last nugget one interesting thing he mentioned is that the brain is always conceptualized as cutting-edge technology in all times and places. And I thought that was interesting because I kind of think of the brain as a hard drive, right, where you store memories and then recall them later when you need them. But I looked it up, and he's exactly right. René Descartes thought the brain worked on a hydraulic system. That's what he thought back in the 1600s. Wow. pistons, and internal combustion engines were another model. Electrical wiring, became another model as the Industrial Revolution ran its course and yielded its fruits. Right, these are the different brain metaphors that we came up with. And hard drive is the latest one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more like the cloud now, right? Would be my current interpretation of the brain. It's like how we access the cloud. Panpsychism is, I guess an idea I've heard of before, but I don't know it's necessarily at odds with just the model of the universe where things are real, or like things kind of don't exist until they are experienced.
Yes,
and that's kind of what makes them real.
Yeah, there's like not an interference, but a probability. Right? You were talking about
superposition.
Yeah, you were talking about philosophical superpositions last week. Well, a literal superposition is something where particles don't have a defined location until someone looks. Right? All they have is a probability equation. Kind of like if I'm going to send an email, where you could write a probabilistic equation, like a version of the Drake equation, that would give you all defined email addresses in the world, assign 0% probability to most of them, because I don't know those email addresses, and then judged by my past email frequencies, you could create some kind of a probabilistic equation, and then the entire thing, once I push send on the email, the probabilistic equation collapses, and the email I sent to Brian becomes the only thing you need. Well, now this variable is now defined as the email is going to Brian. So that's the sort of collapse that happens. Apparently, when we look and observe the observable universe, that's what's happening. Yeah. Probability equations are collapsing.
Yeah, so just your experience of the world or the universe has some kind of effect on the universe that causes it to collapse. And I guess that part makes sense. And is that at odds with like panpsychism? Like, or do like your couch, like, does it, I don't know, is it having some kind of experience then? Is that what panpsychism means?
Yeah, it's having the couch is having some kind of a low grade experience. That's exactly what panpsychism means.
Well, is air having a low grade experience then? I guess you'd have to assume so.
It's not a theory I know much about, so maybe someone will have to go over to visit us at systemfailure.org, click on the About page, and then click on one of our names and let us know. But yeah, I believe that if there's matter there, then the idea is that it has some level of consciousness, a modicum or a quantum of consciousness, and that when you build up a whole structure together, now you have a much better, or you have a much more sophisticated level of consciousness. But like the way that obviously radio signals are nothing but light waves, right, of a certain frequency, and they vibrate the medium, the matter that is the medium that surrounds it, and your radio can pick up the frequency of your favorite local radio station, local rock station. But I mean, a pot of water, it's not a radio antenna, but those vibrations are still there, vibrating the molecules in that pot of water. You just haven't got a receiver that's going to be able to aggregate or integrate that signal into an intelligible broadcast. But I think it's a similar idea to your pot of water does not serve as a functional antenna, even though its core constituents, the water molecules, are being vibrated at those frequencies that the radio station is broadcasting at. If that makes a lick of sense.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you could have a bunch of, I don't know, carbohydrates and proteins and fats just like lying all about. But if you put them in the right order, suddenly it's like a raccoon or something.
Right, yeah.
And so maybe you could say the same thing about our relationship to, particles with their own, some kind of experience having and whatnot. So, all right. Anyway, well, I don't know that the two theories are incompatible, but not an expert on the
Certainly
subject.
not. You take a wire hanger and you stick it in the back of your old-timey tube TV, and suddenly the Bruins game is coming in clearer, right? Because you've just created a structure that can receive the superior signal, whereas before you had an inferior structure. So I think that is the theory on offer here.
All right.
Well, so I want to now just seem like I'm shifting gears a little bit and talk about the Great Schism of 1054, but we're going to bring it back to this idea of the theory of mind here. So just bear with me, Brian, because I had an amusing moment visiting our friends out in Serbia. I mean, it became clear that to the Orthodox Christians, to the Greek Christians, to those who cleave to the Greek half of the Christian church, to them, we're all like Catholics, right? Everyone who subscribes to the Latin Church is a Catholic, right? Even though here in New England we make a big deal about we're the Protestant Christians, we're not the Catholics. We make a big deal about the Protestant Reformation of the 1500s, and in our minds that's a major diverging in the path, a major crossroads in the journey, the journey, the path of these ideas, the genealogy of these ideas throughout history. So it's funny to hear that they don't make a distinction between Catholics and Protestants. To them, we're just all Catholics. And so that really, it lent an interesting perspective to this genealogy of ideas and how they're passed down from generation to generation, and how different perspectives, see how from their perspective, like the major fork in the road to us that was the Protestant Reformation is downstream of the fork between the Greek and the Latin churches. And that, of course, happened in 1054 when the Great Schism of 1054, the patriarch, the way that Christianity worked prior to 1054 was that Christianity was ruled by the 5 patriarchs, right? The 5 patriarchates that made up Christianity. You had your patriarch in Rome, you had your patriarch in Constantinople, in Antioch, in Jerusalem, and in Alexandria, right? 5 patriarchates. And what essentially happened in the 11th century was that the Roman patriarch decided he wanted to be the main patriarch of the entire Christian church. And so, but obviously the patriarch in Constantinople was not having that. And so they both mutually excommunicated each other. And that led to just a few decades later, you get the Crusades. So the Crusaders first sacked Jerusalem in 1099. And the Crusades were advertised as this fight against Islam, but really, the Muslims had taken Jerusalem during the Muslim conquests of the 600s we just talked about a few minutes ago. Or it had been 400 years in possession of the Muslim forces by the time the Crusaders arrived on the Holy Land. And more to the point, Caliph Omar, the guy who had conquered Jerusalem, had declared, that, like you said, that the Jews and the Christians were to be allowed to practice their faith unmolested, and that there was to be a freedom of religion in Jerusalem. And famously, Caliph Omar declined to turn the Church of the Holy Sepulchre into a mosque and said, let it be kept for Christian worship. And so that way, we can have tolerance and comedy and accord among the different, people of the book, the Abrahamic religions. Well, 400 years later, you get, like French knights, laying siege to Jerusalem. And when they captured the city, they were not kind to its inhabitants. They slaughtered the Jewish and the Muslim populations out of hand. So that was the difference there. But the Crusades were sold by what's Pope Urban II as if it was a retaking of the Holy Land from the Muslims, as if it was a conflict against the Muslims, but really it was an internecine Christian conflict, right? That's why you have the Crusaders laying siege to Constantinople and Antioch, 2 Christian cities, right? People don't, there's it's like the war in Iran, right? There's the public reasons, which we get a potpourri of various, justifications, causes belli for the war in Iran, but then there's real reasons, there's real geopolitical reasons behind the scenes why it's happening. And so it was with the Great Schism of 1054 and the subsequent Crusades, right? Really what was happening was the Pope, the Roman Patriarch, was trying to take over the rest of the Catholic Church, of the Christian Church, and didn't manage the job. So now you've got, your Greek Orthodox Christians on the one hand and your Roman Catholics on the other. And then the Roman Catholics had all kinds of fun splitting into Luther's and many hybrids, as Christopher Hitchens referred to the Protestant denominations. But the thing that really struck me about all this is that Christianity is itself, it's not, the Christian church fathers like to pretend that their religion was started as a direct revelation from God and didn't have precursors or predecessors, but really you can trace the genealogy of ideas through more of these crazy splits in the stream, like the Orthodox Catholic split or the Catholic Protestant split. And one of those, of course, is it's got to be understood that Plato, his philosophy was much more popular with the Romans than it ever had been with his, fellow Greeks. And by the time that the Roman Empire started to really come apart in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries, Platonism, Plato's ideas, his idea of a hidden dimension, right, a realm of ideals that's not this realm, right? There's the observable universe, and it is just a reflection or a shadow or an emanation from this realm of ideas. And that notion had given spawn to all these different rival kinds of Platonism, particularly in 3rd century Alexandria, where you have Porphyry and Proclus and guys like this, the great Neoplatonists. But some of the major versions of Platonism on offer were Gnosticism, right? The Gnostics, their idea was that as the Roman Empire crumbled and everything lapsed into decay, was that only an evil god would have trapped us in this shadowy, realm, Plato's shadowy realm of imperfection, and that really the God, a lot of times these Gnostics were also Christians at the same time, and that to them that the God of the Old Testament was this evil God trapping people, trapping people inside this shadowy realm of imperfection, and they often abstain from like procreative sex because every child that's born is trapping light inside inside this horrible reality. So the Gnostics were extreme pessimists, and also a lot of the times Christian. It has to be it must be mentioned, about the Gnostic Gospels, of course, Brian, that they dug up in Egypt in 1945 at Nag Hammadi, and there's all these other Gospels that were not endorsed by the church, the Gospel of Doubting Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and so that's the Gnostics. Then you have the Neoplatonists, who were reacting to the Gnostics in the veil of woe that they thought we all lived in. They were like, no, it's not. Yes, it's true. Evil things are happening. We can't deny it. It's not that we've been trapped here by an evil God. It's that we're just far away from God. Our distance from God. Right? God exists in this Platonic realm of perfection, and we're here in this imperfect realm. The Neoplatonists were saying it's just like in the way that darkness is the absence of light. Evil exists here in the shadowy realm of imperfection because we're just divorced from God. We're separated from God. And this was St. Augustine's religion before his conversion to Christianity. The man was a noted Neoplatonist. And then there's also Hermeticism. The idea behind Hermeticism was that really, and now we're getting back to Michael Pollan and this Copernican inversion and the nature of consciousness, right? The Hermeticists thought that people are co-authors with God of the reality that we're living in. That it's like an interaction between humankind and the gods that gives rise to this reality, and that became once the last Roman emperors adopted Christianity as the state religion of the dying Roman Empire. They adopted the Augustinian version, right? The idea where the ascent to the invisible Platonic hidden dimension is to be achieved through penitence and through morality. This was the conception of Christianity adopted by the Roman oligarchy at Nicaea in the 4th century, and so it is the version of Christianity we get today. But Neoplatonism, Gnosticism, Hermeticism, these other versions of Platonism / Christianity that became illegal. They became persecuted by the late Roman emperors. Those all went underground for the entire Middle Ages until they started bubbling up from the surface during the Italian Renaissance as Renaissance magic. Right? Alchemy comes to us out of Hermeticism. And the idea here is you don't ascend to the invisible realm of the gods through penitence for your sins or for not sinning. You ascend to that realm through particular kinds of work, the magnum opus, the great labor. And so it's interesting to me that where we in New England think of ourselves as Protestants and not Catholics, but then to the Orthodox Christians, we are Catholics, right? It goes to show that there's many more forks in the road than just Protestant Catholic or Catholic Orthodox, and that really what we're talking about is the subset of a broader philosophy of Platonism, which has had a colossal impact upon history. I mean, the joke here is that Plato casts the longest intellectual shadow in history. It's a reference to his allegory of the cave, where the reality we are living in is really comprised of shadows. So anyway, Brian, that's what was on my mind when it became obvious that to the good people of Serbia, we are all Catholics.
All right. So if we're Catholics, what are the Serbians?
They think of themselves as Orthodox Christians.
And what's the
Greek
difference?
Christians.
And what's the difference between Orthodox Christianity and Catholicism?
One is Greek and one's Latin.
And what does that mean? So one's Roman and one's Greek? Or?
That's it, yeah. One literally uses, like you go to Serbia, they have the Cyrillic text. You'll see the same text in Moscow, right? The Russians use the same Cyrillic text. Well, that comes from a monk called Cyril who adopted the Greek language into the language that the various Slavic nations use. So that's why we don't recognize, if you go to Moscow, you're not going to be able to read the signs on the windows of the shops, because they're all using this Cyrillic alphabet, not the Latin alphabet, right? So it's fundamentally a split between Greek East and Latin West, and we interpreted the Latin letters, we interpreted the Latin versions of Christianity, and they interpreted the Greek. They're much more Greek in the way they do things.
And so are you saying that one of those traditions is more platonically aligned?
Well, I'm saying that they're both descendants, they're both children of this broader idea of Platonism, right? Like the idea of the hidden dimension, the realm of perfection, right? The idealized realm that's invisible to us but yet exists. Well, this comes to us from Plato, and it went on to become the Christian conception of heaven. We can just trace the idea of the hidden dimension through layers and layers of philosophical, intellectual, and religious history.
I see.
Yeah. Yes. And so, even though it's like the split in the tree of Christianity, right? The split in the branches between Protestantism and Catholicism is above the place in the trunk where Orthodox Christianity and Catholic Christianity split in 1054. But then you keep going down the trunk, and you're like, wait a second, but Catholic Christianity, or Christianity in general itself, was a branch of this larger trunk called Platonism, right? So it's interesting to see, to locate yourself on the map of the genealogy of ideas, and that's what I kind of, having people, trying to explain to people, oh no, we're not Catholic, we have like a Protestant thing, and they're like, okay, so you're on the wrong side of the schism of 1054, we got you, you're Catholic. Having that experience reminded me how many divisions there are in this big intellectual tree, and how Christianity itself is just a branch on a much larger trunk.
All right, and so when did Christianity split from Platonism?
During the fall of Rome.
And when was that?
3rd century, let's say. In the 300s. Let's say 4th century, 300s. And that's when it was all like Alexandria was this intoxicating crossroads of the world back in the day. Alexandria in the Nile Delta, where the great library was, where the Pharos, the great lighthouse of Alexandria, once stood soaring over the harbor of Alexandria, where 1,000 ships from the furthest points of the compass once docked their prows. Here was where it was the great. Obviously, the city was founded by Alexander in the 3rd century BC, 600 years prior, and it was this great. You had like Platonists and Gnostics and Christians, and a lot of crossover between. You had like yogis from India, because obviously Alexander's conquest made it all the way to India. That in the eddy of his conquest, out to Western Asia, all of these ideas flowed back west to like the Mediterranean basin, a lot of these ideas. So you had like yogis alongside Gnostics who who only did anal sex so they wouldn't trap any more children in this horrible matrix of Plato's. And then you had the Neoplatonists saying, no, it's just that we just got to get closer to God through penitence and through morality, And then you had the Hermeticists saying, no, the best way to ascend to Plato's hidden dimension is through the magnum opus or the great work. You can just see where all these ideas are mixing together in a crazy mishmash, and what comes out of it is Nicene Christianity enforced by the Roman government and legally adopted as a code of the tattered remains of the Roman Empire, also in the 300s.
And so what does the Roman Empire emerge into after the fall of Rome?
Well, the Roman Empire snaps like the Titanic and splits into two, and you have the Western Roman Empire carry on for a bit until it's finally sacked by Germans, who were formerly hired as mercenaries by the Romans. But the Eastern Roman Empire, right, it sticks around, and it doesn't go anywhere until 1453. I mean, you can say that Rome fell in I'm trying to remember when there was a couple famous sacks of Rome in the 300s. So some people, mark the end of the Roman Empire there and carry on a polity called the Byzantine Empire, centered in Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul, Turkey. But that thing lasted another 1,000 years. It wasn't until the Turkish Sultan rolled cannons onto the battlefield that the walls of Theodosius, the 3rd century Christian Roman emperor, finally met their match. They finally were able to demo the walls of Theodosius with cannons, because the city of Constantinople, now Istanbul, sits on a peninsula, kind of like Boston. And there's just like you can by creating one set of walls, the walls of Theodosius, to cut off that peninsula, it just made the city impregnable. And so it wasn't until gunpowder that the Turkish Sultan was finally able to take Constantinople. And that touches off, 1453, that touches off a chain of events that gives us the world we see today. Because the Sultan closed the port to Christian merchant ships, and the crowned heads of Christendom reacted to that by funding expeditions westward across the Atlantic Ocean to try to find an alternative sea route to the Orient. This after Marco Polo's spice road had been severed by the Sultan's conquest of Constantinople and the subsequent renaming it of Istanbul. Yeah.
All right, I think that's all a pretty fascinating line of inquiry.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think you should make some kind of tree. You should you need like a visual diagram, or I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what the proper medium is, but there should be something that explores this divergent tree of history or whatnot, and something that can take you from each step and see the outcomes. So like maybe some kind of software program or something. But that's pretty fascinating, I think.
Software might be a little beyond my capability, but I think I could come up with a decent graphic. My graphic design skills have improved considerably during my years of creating these system failure essays. In fact, when I go back and look at the graphics I was making two years ago, I hang my head in shame because they truly are an abomination compared to what I can do now. So you're right, Brian. It is high time that I made a little intellectual map of history and filled in all the little pieces. That might be an entertaining thing to email out to the good subscribers of the old System Failure newsletter, eh?
All right.
Okay, Brian, well, I suppose now is the time to bring it home, and that is when I invite all of our listeners, as already mentioned once during this pod, to pay us a little visit over to systemfailure.org. There, you can sign up to receive the weekly newsletters written by yours truly, or even better, you can let Brian and I know what you thought of this week's podcast by going to the About page and clicking on the appropriate name.
You can let us know if you think this will be like the fall of the American Empire or if it's anti-Semite.
Yes, we would love to hear from you. Okay, and of course I'll be back on Thursday with the weekly essay read, and then Brian and I will be back with our very last podcast from your apartment, Brian, before you make the move to Rhode Island 1 week hence, and so we'll be back 1 week from today on Monday with another regularly scheduled edition of the good old System Failure Podcast.
All right.